The rain poured mercilessly over Manhattan as Emma Hartwell stood frozen at the altar of St. Patrick's Cathedral, her ivory Vera Wang gown clinging to her trembling frame. 200 guests watched in stunned silence as the wedding coordinator whispered the devastating truth into her ear. Her fiancé, Richard Ashford III, heir to the Ashford Hotel empire, had been spotted leaving the Plaza Hotel with her maid of honor, Sophia Clark, just hours before the ceremony. Emma's carefully constructed world shattered in an instant. Without a word, she gathered her voluminous skirt and ran, ignoring her mother Victoria's horrified shrieks and the gasps that rippled through the congregation. Emma ran blindly through the rain-soaked streets of New York, her designer heels abandoned somewhere between Fifth Avenue and nowhere. Mascara streaked down her cheeks as she stumbled through unfamiliar neighborhoods. Hours passed in a blur of pain and humiliation, her father Robert's disappointed face replaying endlessly in her mind. She had given up everything, her art scholarship, her dreams of painting, to become the perfect Hartwell daughter. As darkness fell, Emma collapsed on a bench in a small Brooklyn park, shivering and alone, wondering how she had become so lost in a life that was never truly hers. The sound of footsteps on wet pavement made Emma look up through her tears. A man approached slowly, his dark hair disheveled and rain-soaked, wearing a worn coat that had seen better days. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had lived on the streets, yet his eyes, dark, intense, and impossibly kind, held something that made Emma's breath catch. He stopped a respectful distance away, studying her with an expression that wasn't pity but understanding, as if he recognized the particular brand of devastation that had brought her to this bench in the rain. "Bad day?" His voice was unexpectedly gentle, with a hint of educated refinement that didn't match his appearance. Emma let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob, gesturing at her mud-stained wedding dress. The stranger moved closer, sitting on the far end of the bench, and extended a small bouquet of dried flowers toward her. "I know they're not much, but they're honest. No pretense, no lies." Emma stared at the simple offering, something cracking inside her chest at the unexpected kindness when her own family had abandoned her at the altar. "I'm Daniel," he said softly, his gaze never leaving her face. "And yes, I know what it's like to lose everything in a single moment." There was a story in those words, a depth of suffering that matched her own. Emma found herself leaning forward despite every instinct. She should be afraid, alone with a stranger, but something about Daniel made her feel safer than she had in years. He didn't ask questions or offer empty platitudes, he simply sat with her in the rain, sharing the silence of two people who understood that some pain was too deep for words. As the rain softened, Daniel stood and offered his hand. His palm was calloused and warm against her cold fingers, and when their eyes met, something electric passed between them, a recognition that defied logic. "Come on," he said quietly. "There's a place nearby where you can get warm. You don't have to go back to whatever broke you tonight." Emma found herself nodding, her hands still clasped in his as if she might drown if she let go. As Daniel led her through the rainy streets, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this homeless stranger felt more like destiny than the man she had almost married. Daniel led Emma through narrow Brooklyn streets until they reached a small cafe with warm light spilling from its windows. The sign above read Hannah's Haven in faded letters, and through the glass, Emma could see mismatched furniture and walls covered with amateur paintings. Daniel pushed open the door, and a bell chimed softly. A Korean woman in her 50s looked up from behind the counter, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in Emma's ruined wedding gown. "Daniel," she said warmly. "You brought someone who needs help." It wasn't a question, and Emma felt tears threatening again at the simple acceptance in the woman's voice. "Mrs. Hannah Choi, this is Emma," Daniel introduced quietly, his hand still steadying Emma's elbow. Hannah moved quickly, grabbing towels and guiding Emma toward a back room. "Come, dear. Let's get you into something dry." Emma followed numbly, glancing back at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. In the small bathroom, Hannah provided sweatpants and an oversized sweater, turning away to give Emma privacy. As Emma peeled off the expensive wedding gown, letting it pool on the floor like a discarded dream, she caught her reflection in the mirror, red eyes, tangled hair, and a face she barely recognized. When Emma emerged, Hannah had prepared hot tea and soup at a corner table where Daniel waited. The cafe was empty except for them, the late hour keeping other customers away. Emma sat across from Daniel, wrapping her hands around the warm mug, and for the first time, she really looked at him. Despite his rough appearance, There was something refined in the way he held himself, an elegance that poverty couldn't quite erase. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. Daniel's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. Everyone deserves kindness on their worst day. Hannah brought the soup, patting Emma's shoulder maternally before retreating to give them space. As Emma took her first sip, warmth spreading through her chest, she noticed Daniel watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read: protective, sad, and something deeper. "How long have you been on the streets?" she asked softly. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, and he looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. 2 years, he said finally. "But I wasn't always this way. I had everything once: career, apartment, future. Then I made one mistake, trusted the wrong person, and it all disappeared overnight." "What happened?" Emma pressed gently, leaning forward. For a moment, she forgot her own pain, drawn into the mystery of this man who had appeared when she needed someone most. Daniel's eyes returned to hers, and she saw walls there, protective barriers built from suffering. "That's a story for another time," he said quietly, but his hand moved across the table, stopping just inches from hers. The almost touch felt more intimate than any embrace Emma had shared with Richard. "Tonight is about you, Emma. Tell me, who were you before you became a runaway bride?" The cafe lights flickered as thunder rumbled outside, and Emma found herself telling Daniel everything: her lost dreams of art school, her father's pressure to marry well, how she had slowly erased herself to become someone acceptable. Daniel listened without judgment, his dark eyes never leaving her face, and when she finished, he reached across and finally took her hand. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out who we really are," he said softly. Through the window, Emma noticed a black car pulling up to the curb, and her blood ran cold as she recognized her father's driver. Emma's grip tightened on Daniel's hand as she watched the black Mercedes idling outside Hannah's haven. Her father's driver, Thomas, stepped out, surveying the street with sharp eyes. "I have to go," Emma whispered, panic rising in her throat, but Daniel's hand held hers firmly. "Do you want to go?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes searching hers intently. The question struck Emma like lightning. No one had ever asked what she wanted, only what she should do. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with messages from her mother Victoria, her father Robert, and her sister Grace. "They're looking everywhere. Mom is furious. Please come home." Daniel stood slowly, positioning himself between Emma and the window. "There's a back door," he said quietly, nodding toward Hannah, who was already moving toward them. "But you need to decide, Emma. Running away twice in one night means something. It means you're choosing a different path." His words carried weight, and Emma's heart hammered as she looked between the door and the window where Thomas was now approaching the cafe entrance. Everything in her upbringing screamed to face her family, to apologize, to fix the scandal. But a newer, rawer part of her wanted to disappear into the night with this mysterious stranger who saw her as more than a Hartwell disappointment. The bell chimed as Thomas entered, his eyes immediately finding Emma. "Miss Hartwell," he said formally, relief evident in his weathered face. "Your parents have been worried sick. Your mother had to be sedated." Emma stood frozen, shame flooding through her as she imagined the chaos her escape had caused. Behind Thomas, photographers gathered outside, their cameras ready to capture the scandalous runaway bride. The story would be everywhere by morning, and her family's reputation would be destroyed completely if she didn't handle this perfectly. "I'll come," Emma heard herself say, the words tasting like surrender. Daniel's hand slipped from hers, and the loss of his warmth felt like abandoning something precious. But Thomas was already moving forward, professional and efficient, ready to escort her back to the world she knew. As Emma moved toward the door, she glanced back at Daniel, whose expression had shuttered closed, distant and unreadable. "Wait," she said suddenly, turning back. "How do I find you again?" The question surprised even herself, but the thought of never seeing Daniel again created a hollow ache in her chest. Daniel's eyes softened for just a moment before his walls rebuilt themselves. "You won't," he said quietly. "You belong in penthouses, Emma, not park benches. Go back to your life." His words stung, but Emma saw through them to the hurt underneath. He was protecting himself from hoping for something impossible. "Daniel, please," she started, but Thomas touched her elbow gently, urgently. "Miss Hartwell, we need to leave now before this becomes a media circus." Emma's feet felt rooted to the floor, torn between two worlds, two versions of herself, two impossible choices. As Thomas guided her toward the door, Emma pulled away one last time and rushed back to Daniel, pressing something into his hand, her grandmother's pearl earring, the only jewelry she hadn't lost. "Keep this," she whispered urgently. "So I know you're real, that tonight was real." Daniel's fingers closed around the pearl, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Emma," he said softly, her name sounding like a promise and a goodbye. Then Thomas was pulling her away, out into the flashing cameras and shouting reporters, back toward the Mercedes. As the car pulled away, Emma looked back to see Daniel standing in the doorway, the pearl earring catching the light in his palm, watching her disappear into the night. The Hartwell penthouse on the Upper East Side felt more like a courtroom than a home when Emma arrived. Her mother Victoria paced the marble floor in her silk robe, mascara-stained and furious, while her father Robert stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back rigid with disappointment. Emma's younger sister Grace sat curled on the white leather sofa, her eyes filled with worry and something else, pity, perhaps, or relief that she wasn't the daughter who had failed so spectacularly. 6 hours, Victoria hissed as Emma entered, still wearing Hannah's oversized sweater. 6 hours you left us to deal with the fallout, the humiliation, the reporters demanding to know why Robert Hartwell's daughter ran from her own wedding. Robert turned slowly, his steel-gray eyes assessing Emma with cold calculation. "The Ashfords are threatening to pull out of the merger," he said quietly, each word precise and cutting. 20 years of negotiations, billions of dollars, all jeopardized because you couldn't control your emotions. Emma felt the words like physical blows, but beneath the guilt, anger sparked. "Richard was sleeping with Sophia on our wedding day," she said, her voice stronger than expected. "And you're worried about a merger?" Victoria laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Marriage isn't about romance, Emma. It's about alliances, stability, building empires. You were supposed to understand that." Grace stood suddenly, moving to Emma's side in a rare show of solidarity. "Mom, that's not fair." Emma was betrayed. But Victoria waved her away dismissively. "The Pierces have been calling all evening," she said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Robert. Emma's stomach dropped at the mention of the Pierce family. James Kim Pierce, her childhood friend who had studied architecture at Yale, had always watched her with eyes that held too much feeling. She hadn't spoken to him in months, not since Richard had insisted she cut ties with all male friends. "James is back from Seoul," Robert said, his tone shifting to something calculated. "His firm just landed the contract for the new Hartwell Tower. He's accomplished, respectable, and his mother mentioned he's always carried a torch for you." Emma's blood ran cold as she understood where this was heading. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not being bartered off to fix your business deals." Victoria stepped closer, her perfectly manicured hand gripping Emma's chin. "You will do exactly what this family needs. You humiliated us tonight. You owe us this." The words hung in the air like a cage door slamming shut. "I need time," Emma said, pulling away from her mother's grip. Robert moved toward her, his expression softening slightly in a way that was somehow more dangerous than Victoria's rage. "Emma, sweetheart, I know tonight was difficult. But the world we live in doesn't allow for childish notions of love." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We're giving you a week. 1 week to compose yourself, and then you'll have dinner with James and his family. This is not negotiable." The ultimatum hung heavy in the air, and Emma felt the walls closing in around her once more. Emma retreated to her childhood bedroom, a pristine space of pale pink and cream that felt like a museum dedicated to someone she used to be. Grace followed quietly, closing the door behind them. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Emma admitted, pulling out her phone and staring at the blank screen, thinking of Daniel somewhere in Brooklyn with her grandmother's pearl. "Grace, have you ever felt like you're living someone else's life?" Her sister looked away, tears glinting in her eyes. "Every single day," Grace whispered. Through the window, Emma could see the city lights stretching endlessly, and somewhere out there was a man with secrets who had made her feel more alive in one evening than 5 years with Richard ever had. 3 days after the disastrous wedding, Emma stood in her father's office at Hartwell Financial Group, staring at architectural blueprints for the new tower that would reshape Manhattan's skyline. She had barely slept, haunted by dreams of dark eyes and calloused hands, the pearl earring burning in her memory like an unfinished conversation. "Emma, are you listening?" Robert's voice cut through her thoughts. Across the conference table sat James Kim Pierce, more handsome than she remembered, his once boyish features now refined by time and success. His black hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit speaking of wealth and accomplishment, but his eyes, those warm brown eyes, still held the same gentle devotion they had when they were teenagers sharing dreams. James was just explaining the design concept, Robert continued, oblivious to the tension crackling in the room. James smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's good to see you again, Emma. I heard about the wedding. I'm sorry." His voice carried genuine sympathy, and Emma felt guilt twist in her stomach. James had always been kind, always been there, and she had pushed him away because Richard demanded it. Robert stood, checking his watch with calculated precision. "I have a call with Tokyo. James, why don't you show Emma the rooftop garden designs? I think you two have a lot to catch up on." The suggestion was anything but subtle. James moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, nothing like the rain and earth scent that had clung to Daniel. "You don't have to pretend with me, Emma," James said softly. "I know your father is orchestrating this. I know you don't love me." His honesty surprised her, and Emma finally looked at him, seeing the pain beneath his composed exterior. "Then why are you here?" she asked. James's jaw tightened, and he turned to face her fully. "Because I've loved you since we were 15 years old, and even if you never love me back, I'd rather be near you than not." Emma's heart ached at his confession. This was the devoted second lead who loved faithfully but without hope. "James," she started, but he held up his hand. "Don't apologize. Don't pity me. Just let me help you." He pulled out his phone, showing her a news article that made her blood run cold. The headline read, "Mysterious vagrant attacked in Brooklyn, victim identified as former tech CEO." The accompanying photo, grainy but unmistakable, showed Daniel being loaded into an ambulance, his face bruised and bloody. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her legs suddenly weak. "That's him, isn't it?" James asked quietly. "The man from that night. Hannah Choi called my office. She remembered seeing my business card from a charity project. She thought you should know." Emma grabbed James's phone, reading desperately through the article. Daniel had been beaten by 3 men outside Hannah's Haven 2 nights ago, apparently targeted for the pearl earring he'd been carrying, an earring worth thousands that marked him as having stolen from someone wealthy. He was at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital in stable condition but had refused to give police any information. "I have to go to him," Emma said, already moving toward the door. James caught her wrist gently, his grip a pale echo of the way Daniel had held her hand. "Emma, think about what you're doing. If the press finds out, if your father discovers you're involved with a homeless man, the scandal will destroy your family." Emma looked at James, seeing the choice laid bare before her, safety or truth, duty or desire. "He was hurt because of me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Because I gave him something valuable without thinking." James studied her face, and something shifted in his expression, resignation, perhaps, or painful acceptance. "Then I'll drive you," he said quietly. "But Emma, when you see him, you need to decide what you really want. Because I can't keep loving someone who's in love with someone else." Brooklyn Methodist Hospital smelled of antiseptic and broken promises as Emma rushed through the corridors, James trailing behind her like a silent guardian. Her heart hammered when she reached room 412, her hand trembling on the door handle. Inside, Daniel lay in the hospital bed, his face marked with purple bruises and a cut above his eyebrow. But what stopped her breath completely was the man standing beside Daniel's bed, a Korean American in an expensive suit, his expression torn between relief and anger. "David Park," James whispered behind her. "Former partner at Zenith Technologies. Which means Daniel is." Daniel's eyes opened as Emma entered, and she saw shock flash across his features before his expression shuddered. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough from pain and something deeper, shame, perhaps, or fear of exposure. David Park turned, his sharp eyes assessing Emma. "So you're the reason he's been carrying around a $20,000 pearl earring on the streets of Brooklyn," he said. "I'm David Park, Daniel's former business partner." Emma moved to Daniel's bedside, her hand finding his before she could stop herself. "Who are you really?" she asked softly, needing the truth more than her next breath. Daniel closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Emma saw years of pain reflected there. "My full name is Daniel Park," he said quietly. 3 years ago, I was CEO of Zenith Technologies, worth $40 million, living in a penthouse not unlike your family's. Then my fiancé and my CFO, my best friend, embezzled $30 million and framed me for it. By the time the truth came out, I'd lost everything. My reputation was destroyed, my family disowned me, and I couldn't face rebuilding." David stepped forward, his frustration evident. "The charges were dropped, Daniel. The real criminals are in prison. Your money is still in accounts I've been managing. You have $15 million waiting, a penthouse in Tribeca, and companies wanting you back." Emma's head spun with this revelation. "Why didn't you come back?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes met hers, raw and vulnerable. "Because I couldn't trust myself anymore. I'd been so blind. Living on the streets was my penance, my way of figuring out who I really was without money and status." James cleared his throat from the doorway. "Emma, your father's been calling. He knows you left the office." The real world came crashing back. "I don't care," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. She turned back to Daniel, her hand coming up to gently touch his bruised face. "You saved me that night, Daniel. You saw me when I was broken. Now let me do the same for you." The words hung between them, a promise and a plea, while James watched with quiet devastation. Daniel caught Emma's hand against his cheek, his thumb stroking her wrist. "Emma, you don't understand what you're asking for," Daniel said. "Your family will never accept this. A homeless man, an ex-CEO with a scandal, I'm everything they'll despise." Emma leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his. "Then we'll figure it out together," she whispered. Behind her, she heard James's sharp intake of breath and the quiet sound of the door closing as he left. Somewhere in Manhattan, Emma's phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages, demanding answers she was no longer willing to give. Emma stayed at Daniel's bedside for 3 hours, ignoring 17 calls from her father and 23 text messages from her mother that escalated from concern to fury to ultimatums. David Park had left to give them privacy, but not before pressing his business card into Emma's hand and whispering, "Help him come back to life. He's been a ghost for too long." Now, as afternoon light filtered through the hospital window, Emma sat with Daniel's hand in hers, learning the details of his fall from grace. "My father said I brought shame to the Park name," Daniel said quietly. "In Korean culture, family honor is everything. I couldn't face them, so I disappeared." The door burst open, and Victoria Hartwell stood in the threshold like an avenging angel in Chanel, her face a mask of controlled rage. Robert followed behind her, his expression colder than Emma had ever seen. "Get away from that man," Victoria commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Emma stood slowly, positioning herself between her mother and Daniel's hospital bed. "No," she said simply, and watched her mother's face flush with anger. Robert stepped forward, his eyes assessing Daniel with brutal efficiency. "So you're the vagrant who's bewitched my daughter. Security told me you were attacked over a stolen earring, an earring that belongs to Emma's dead grandmother." "I didn't steal it," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his vulnerable position. "Emma gave it to me." He reached for the bedside table where the pearl sat in a small plastic bag. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound without humor. "My daughter gave a family heirloom worth $20,000 to a man living on the streets? Do you expect us to believe that?" Emma felt rage building in her chest. "I gave it to him because he treated me with more kindness in one night than Richard showed me in 5 years." Robert's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Choose your next words carefully, Emma. This family has tolerated your dramatics for 3 days, but our patience has limits." He pulled out his phone, showing her photographs: Emma running from the cathedral, Emma in Hannah's cafe, Emma entering the hospital with James. The press is circling like sharks. The Ashford merger is dead. And now I find you with a man whose background check reveals fraud charges, bankruptcy, and a complete mental breakdown. Emma's hands shook. The charges were dropped, she said. He was innocent. He was framed. Victoria moved closer to Daniel's bed, her expression predatory. Innocent or not, you're a liability. I'll write you a check for $1 million to disappear from my daughter's life. The offer hung in the air like poison, and Emma watched Daniel's face carefully, terrified he might take it. But Daniel's eyes never left Emma's. I don't want your money, Mrs. Hartwell. I want your daughter to be free to choose her own life, even if that choice doesn't include me. Victoria smiled triumphantly. You see? Even he knows this is impossible. Now come home, and we'll manage this disaster. Emma looked at Daniel, at the bruises on his face and the resignation in his eyes, and she saw the moment clearly, the exact point where she could step back into her gilded cage or leap into the unknown. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. Whatever you decide, I'll respect. But choosing him means losing everything. Emma took a breath that felt like the first real breath of her life. No, Mother, she said quietly, her voice trembling but determined. I'm not coming home. Robert stepped forward, his voice deadly calm. If you walk away now, you walk away from everything, your trust fund, your inheritance, your place in this family. Emma looked at Daniel one more time. Then I'll have nothing, she whispered, but at least I'll have myself. The silence after Emma's declaration felt like the world holding its breath. Victoria's face contorted with rage and disbelief, while Robert's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. You ungrateful child, Victoria hissed, her voice shaking. After everything we've given you, every opportunity, every advantage, you're throwing it away for a man you met 3 days ago? Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. You never gave me anything, Mother. You gave the daughter you wanted me to be. I'm giving her back. The words tasted like freedom and terror, and Emma's legs trembled beneath her, but she didn't move from Daniel's bedside. Robert pulled out his phone with deliberate precision. Consider this your final warning, Emma. By tomorrow morning, every account with your name will be frozen. Your credit cards will be cancelled. The apartment we bought will be sold. You'll be cut off completely, no safety net, no family support, nothing. He paused, giving her one last chance to reconsider. Is this vagrant really worth losing everything? Emma's hand found Daniel's again, and she felt his fingers tighten around hers, not pulling her toward him, but steadying her for whatever choice she made. He's not a vagrant, Emma said, her voice gaining strength. His name is Daniel Park, and he's worth more than all your merger deals because he's real. He doesn't pretend. He sees people as humans, not assets. Victoria laughed cruelly, moving toward the door. How poetic. Let's see how romantic poverty feels when you're sleeping on the streets. Robert, let's go. Our daughter has made her choice. But Robert lingered, his eyes studying Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read, disappointment, yes, but also something that might have been grudging respect. You look like your grandmother right now, Robert said quietly, and for a moment, his mask slipped. She was the only person who ever stood up to me, who chose love over duty. My mother said she'd regret it. He paused, his jaw tightening. She never regretted it, not for one day. But Emma, she was stronger than you. She had skills, determination. What do you have besides a trust fund? You've never worked a real job, never struggled. This fantasy will break you within a week. His words cut deep because Emma feared they were true. Daniel shifted in his hospital bed, his voice rough but clear. Then she'll learn. And I'll teach her what I learned on the streets, how to survive, how to fight, how to build something from nothing. Your daughter is stronger than you've ever let her be, Mr. Hartwell. You just never gave her the chance to prove it. Robert's eyes moved to Daniel, really seeing him for the first time, and something flickered in his expression, recognition of a fellow man who had lost everything and survived. You were Daniel Park of Zenith Technologies. I know your story. If you have even half that brilliance left, you might protect my daughter from the wolves." Victoria's voice cut through from the doorway, sharp and final. "Robert, stop. She's made her bed, let her lie in it. Emma, you have 24 hours to come home and apologize. After that, we'll release a statement disowning you completely." She turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing like a countdown. Robert lingered one moment longer. 24 hours, Emma. Think carefully. Pride is expensive, and love is no guarantee. Then he was gone, leaving Emma standing in the hospital room. Through the window, she could see the city stretching endlessly, beautiful, terrifying, full of possibilities. Daniel pulled her gently down to sit on the edge of his bed, his bruised face full of concern. "Emma," he whispered, "are you sure?" Emma looked into Daniel's eyes, seeing her own fear mixed with fragile hope. "I'm sure," she whispered, though her hands trembled. "For the first time, I'm choosing something for myself. I'm choosing you." Daniel pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't have anything to offer you," he said, his voice breaking. Emma's hands framed his bruised face. "You offered me truth when everyone else gave me lies. That's everything." When Daniel's lips finally met hers, it was nothing like the kisses she had shared with Richard. This kiss tasted like redemption, like two people finding something worth saving. When they pulled apart, breathless, Emma saw her future in his eyes, uncertain, terrifying, and real. "I love you," she whispered. "I know it's crazy, but I love you, Daniel Park." Daniel's grip tightened. "I love you too. You're the first thing that's made me want to live again in 3 years." The door opened, and David Park entered with James following behind. James's face showed pain, but he forced a smile. "I brought your things," he said quietly. "Your sister Grace packed it. She said she's proud of you." David moved to Daniel's side. "We need to talk logistics. Emma, do you have any money?" Emma's stomach dropped. "No. Everything is connected to my family. I have maybe $300 in cash." David pulled out a folder. "Daniel, these are papers to access your accounts. $15 million waiting. I also have job offers from 5 tech companies." James stepped forward. "My firm needs a project manager for the Hartwell Tower." "Emma, you studied art and design. It's entry-level pay, but it's honest work. And Daniel, your experience would be invaluable for our building systems. I'm offering you both a chance to rebuild." James continued, his voice cracking slightly, "Not because I'm happy about this, but because Emma deserves to succeed." The nobility of his offer touched Emma deeply. Daniel squeezed her hand, and she nodded. They would accept this gift. "We'll take it," Daniel said quietly. James nodded and turned away. David clasped Daniel's shoulder, relief on his face. As they stood in that hospital room, Emma felt her old life falling away, replaced by something uncertain but precious, a future she would create with her own hands. Through the window, the city stretched before them, no longer a prison but a canvas of possibilities. Daniel pulled her close again, and Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. This was just the beginning. 6 months later, Emma stood on the rooftop garden of the Hartwell Tower, watching the sunset paint Manhattan in gold. Her hands, once soft, now bore calluses from real work, long hours coordinating designs, learning that satisfaction came from earning rather than inheriting. Daniel's arms wrapped around her waist. "Happy?" he asked softly. Emma leaned back into his embrace. "Happier than I knew was possible." The past 6 months had been hard, learning to budget, cooking in their modest Brooklyn apartment, enduring headlines that called her foolish. Her mother had publicly disowned her. But Grace called secretly every week, and last month, Emma received an anonymous check for $50,000 with a note in her father's handwriting, "For when pride costs too much." The gesture made Emma cry, recognizing it as the only apology Robert Hartwell knew how to give. Daniel had returned to tech slowly, rebuilding his reputation through David's connections and his own brilliance. Together, they had created a partnership built on honesty and love that deepened daily. Emma turned in Daniel's arms, her hands on his chest. "Thank you for teaching me how to stand," she said. Daniel's hand cupped her face. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Their lips met in a kiss that still made her heart race. Behind them, the rooftop party James organized was in full swing. James stood near the edge with a woman, a doctor he'd been dating. Though sadness still flickered in his eyes, Emma saw healing there too. "Emma!" Grace's voice called. Behind Grace stood Robert Hartwell, his presence speaking volumes. Victoria was absent, her pride too wounded. Grace hugged Emma, whispering, "Dad wanted to see what you've built." Emma's eyes met her father's, and she saw respect there. Robert nodded before turning to leave, his lips moving. "Your grandmother would be proud." As stars appeared, Emma and Daniel stood at the rooftop's edge, looking at the city. Her old life, the penthouses, the trust funds, felt like someone else's dream. This life, earned through struggle, belonged entirely to her. Daniel's hand found hers. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Emma turned to face him. "I was supposed to marry Richard surrounded by people I barely knew. Instead, I found you in the rain, and you gave me myself." Daniel pulled her close, his lips on her forehead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the ongoing journey of rebuilding. But tonight, under Manhattan stars, with Daniel's arms around her, Emma knew she had found what she'd been searching for, not a fairy tale ending, but a real beginning, messy and beautiful and entirely her own. She smiled up at him, and in his eyes she saw their future stretching ahead, uncertain but filled with love. This was just the start of their story.